With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halvorson.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning on the AgNet News Hour. Coming up later, how California ag labor rates stack up against other specialty crop states. But to start our day today, the International Sweetener Symposium is underway. Chad Smith has more.
U.S. sugar industry leaders will be meeting in Seattle, Washington, August 2nd through the 7th for the 39th Annual International Sweetener Symposium hosted by the American Sugar Alliance. This year's conference, titled Stability, Security, Safety, the Need for a Strong Farm Bill, will feature farm leaders, policymakers, and experts who will address many of the critical issues facing the U.S. and world sugar and sweetener industry. Dr. Rob Johansson, Director of Economics and Policy Analysis for the American Sugar Alliance, offers a preview of this year's symposium event as Farm Bill discussions on Capitol Hill continue.
Right now, as our farmers are in the middle of the growing season and looking towards harvest, we are especially concerned with the high cost of production. Farm Bill provides a crucial safety net for sugar beet and sugarcane farmers who dedicate extensive time and resources to providing every American with sugar. America's sugar beet and sugarcane farmers and workers are grateful for the bipartisan support from Congress, and a strengthened sugar policy will preserve this more than $23 billion a year industry.
Rob LaRue, president of the National Farmers Union, says with the extension to the current Farm Bill set to expire in October 2024, this year's symposium is especially timely.
The Farm Bill is the foundation of agricultural policy in the United States. It ensures that farmers and ranchers have the resources to overcome the uncertainties of farming, like market disruptions and unpredictable weather. By investing in our rural communities, the Farm Bill sustains the agricultural economy and supports family farms and jobs here at home. A great example of this is how sugar production in the U.S. creates more than 150,000 jobs in more than 24 states.
Joby Young, Executive Vice President of the American Farm Bureau Federation, says in addition to creating domestic jobs, the Farm Bill helps farmers threatened by imports from other countries.
As farmers and industry experts come together this week, it's going to be a perfect forum to leverage our collective knowledge to navigate the complexities of agriculture policy. Farm Bureau supports a sugar program that protects the interests of domestic sugar producers and allows their sugar to compete in the marketplace. Working together, we can help to secure a prosperous future for America's farmers with the passage of a bipartisan 5-year Farm Bill.
To learn more about the International Sweetener Symposium, follow the American Sugar Alliance on X, Facebook, and Instagram, or search #Sugar2024. Chad Smith reporting.
We are now 8 months into the enforcement of California's animal confinement legislation Prop 12, and pork producers around the nation are feeling the effect. National Pork Producers Council economist Holly Cook says it's a costly transition for producers.
So from a production standpoint, we know that Prop 12 can be very expensive for producers to undertake. There's been a few studies done with data collected from those in the building industry and those that have decided to make adjustments on their farms, which shows that new construction of Prop 12 can be anywhere from $3,600 to $4,000 per sow. There's ways also to convert existing operations, but then we run into maybe losing production, having to reduce the number of animals. And so no matter kind of what way we slice it, it looks to be very expensive.
She says that expense ends up costing consumers.
And that translates, of course, into more expensive pork for consumers. So there's been data that's come out of the retail channels in California. USDA economists recently compiled it and put out a report showing that retail prices are up 20 to 40% for covered pork products in California.
Cook says some pork producers won't be able to make the changes at all, and the industry may have more changes ahead.
For this to make economic sense, producers generally need a pretty large premium to offset those added costs. And some of these costs can be ongoing if they're production related and we're losing, efficiencies with some of the management of this style of farming. So as far as, how long this will last, it's really uncertain. What we do know is that we're in a bit of a vulnerable state here where we have uncertainty. If, other states choose to adopt similar regulations or even different regulations that are going to require more from producers or maybe, conflicting with the current standards set by California for their market, that could be even more expensive and challenging.
You're listening to the AgNet News Hour. In today's National Spotlight, if you're trying to work outside in the severe heat, an expert has some tips to keep you safe from heat stroke. Gary Crawford has the story.
When the weather records and journals are complete for this summer, It is going to be one of the very warmest that we've ever seen.
Agriculture Department meteorologist Brad Rippey, and perhaps the word warm or warmest is an understatement. Temperatures across the globe have been deadly hot. Many of those who work outdoors a lot are being laid low by the heat. Some have died from heat stress and heat stroke. And so to reduce the chances of succumbing to the heat,
basically what we'd like to do is acclimate ourselves to the work environment.
Ohio State University health and safety professor Dee Jepson.
You can't just go out and work a full day the very first day in the heat. You kind of have to let your body build up to that.
Especially if we are not seasoned outdoor workers and just deciding on day one to brave the severe heat and get all of those jobs done around the place, not a good idea, as demonstrated by the statistics.
When we look at outdoor workers in general, half of the deaths that happen to workers will happen on their very first day of the job. And 70% of any of the heat-related deaths occur within the worker's first week of the job.
So to use the technical term, take it easy in the heat. Just do a little work at a time out there and be kind to yourself with
rest, water, and shade.
And plenty of all three, especially water. Dee Jepson says drink at least 1 cup of water every 20 minutes.
A lot of times people think, I don't drink that often, or I don't want to drink that much. I'll be sick. If you're really out working in this heat and out in the elements, every 20 minutes, drink a cup of water. You'll feel much better.
Also wear the lightest, loosest fitting, light-colored clothes that you can get away with. And finally, here's one more clothing suggestion.
Throw away that beloved ball cap. It is not the best work hat.
Instead, she says wear hats with at least a 3-inch brim all the way around them.
They block the UV exposure from your face, the top of your ears, the back of your necks. That is 80% of our skin cancer comes from that part of our bodies. So that tells us that we're not wearing the correct headwear to protect from the UV exposure.
Finally, Dee says even if you follow her advice to the letter, the heat could still start to get to you. So be sure to pay attention to how you're feeling and thinking. Symptoms of heat problems can include
fatigue or dizziness, even irritability, impaired judgment, any type of lack of ability to concentrate.
If you notice any of those symptoms, Dee Jepson says get out of the heat, get cooled down, and get medical help. This is Gary Crawford reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Protect the Harvest stands behind farmers and helps protect their way of life from outside attacks. Lori Boyer has more.
Protect the Harvest Executive Director Mike Siemens explains that the organization was established in 2011 when the animal activist group Humane Society of the United States attempted to pass Proposition B, or the Puppy Mill Bill in Missouri, which targeted animal ownership rights. HSUS, being well-funded and motivated, posed a significant threat to American farmers and ranchers. Thus, Siemens says their founder, Forrest Lucas, saw the need to create an organization to combat this restrictive legislation.
He decided, well, I'm going to start Protect the Harvest, which basically goes out and defends American agriculture, the freedoms, principles, and values. It stands up for food security. It defends property rights, animal ownership, water usage, basically all those things, hunters, fishermen, livestock owners, property owners, farmers, ranchers, you name it. That's what Protect the Harvest stands up for.
Siemens says there are 4 main pillars that Protect the Harvest stands and advocates for to spread awareness.
We try to go out there and hit things on social media and education. We will get involved in terms of trying to educate on, legislative activities. We're not a 501c4, we're C3, so it's basically educational. And then, if needed, we will get into litigations.
Siemens says another big issue that they are working on right now is a ballot initiative in the state of Colorado that would ban the slaughter of livestock in the city and county of Denver.
That's today's National Spotlight. Now here's Rod Bain with the Livestock Report.
Even with summer drying, U.S. pasture and rangeland conditions appear steady week over week. USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey says for the period ending July 28th,
good to excellent ratings down a point this week from the previous week, with 39% good to excellent. The very poor to poor rating steady at 29%.
Dry areas are a patchwork nationwide, with very poor to poor ratings noted within states of regions like the Mid-Atlantic, Intermountain West, and Pacific Northwest.
That's the bad news. The good news is that in the heart of the Midwest, we still see some pretty green conditions. That's reflected in crop conditions as well. Pasture and range, 85% good to excellent in Missouri. Other Midwestern states at or above 70% include Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Michigan.
With green pastures also found in several parts of the Northeast and pockets of very good to excellent pasture and rangeland conditions in states like Florida and North Dakota. Integrating cover crops as part of cattle operations. How might this work? What might it do to improve an operation's profitability?
Cover crops can be used for livestock forage. So like livestock could graze them in the spring or the fall, or they can be mechanically harvested and stored. And we just didn't really have an understanding about how prevalent this was. So for a long time, people have been talking about the potential economic benefits of doing that on livestock operations.
Those areas of focus are behind a recently released USDA study. Maria Bowman of the Economic Research Service is one of the study's authors. Among its findings,
many studies found that integrating cover crops into livestock systems was more profitable than livestock systems that weren't using cover crops. And that was primarily driven by that forage value of the cover crop, so using it and feeding it to livestock.
What about a breakdown by types of operations? Say dairy and beef cattle operations.
When we dug in a little bit more in that Census of Ag data, we saw that dairy and feedlot operations with cropland were more likely to go cover crops. So about 33% of dairy operations and 27% of feedlot operations, so much higher than overall adoption rates in the 2017 Census of Ag. So that suggests that it might be more economic for those operations, that they might have a reason to be cover cropping relative to other operation types.
In terms of total profitability with cover crop integrated livestock operations, a multitude of factors determine that. Factors ranging from types of cover crops to fixed cost for harvesting systems.
Climate and precipitation is another one. If you don't have much water, it's difficult to establish and grow a lot of cover crop forage and labor availability. So potential to expand, but also barriers.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Don't forget, if you've missed any of our morning shows, or if you just want to catch the news at a different time, you can subscribe to our podcast and have statewide agriculture news at your convenience. All you have to do is search for the AgNet News Hour on your favorite podcast downloading app. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson, and we will be back in just a moment. Coming up in a few moments, we'll have today's This Land of Ours report, but first, more of the day's agriculture news. And with a preview of what you'll hear today on AgNet West, here's Brian German.
California fire season is well underway with several areas burning throughout the state. President and CEO of AgSafe, Teresa Keene, explained some of the wildfire risk considerations for agricultural employers.
Thinking about making sure that your emergency action plan is up to date, thinking about where they're working, have they communicated with maybe emergency response? Have you checked in with your fire department? Have you talked to them about where you're going to be? Ensuring communication is happening. How do you communicate with your employees and your supervisors in case you need to move really quick and get them out of an area? Now, if there should be wildfire smoke in your area, there are some regulations that employers need to be aware of. You need to be watching your air quality index. And if that air quality index is 151 or greater, you have some responsibilities as employers.
Several new ag tech resources are going to be featured at this year's FIRA USA event in October. Senior Vice President of Innovation at Western Growers, Walt Duflock, said practicality will be a central theme of panel discussions this year.
You're going to see the WG Assist option where they pay for this time from one of our resources, and we're not making money off it. It's just a pass-through cost for us, but it allows you to basically hire a part-time financial and operations analyst from Western Growers, so you don't have to go get a guy that you're not going to need for 12 months of the year, right? So I'm excited about the grower economic discussions. I'm excited about Ben's case studies, and there'll be more. Carbon robotics is just the first. We've got more coming, and I'm excited about the template, the do-it-yourself option, and the WG Assist option. As I said to the board, I said, listen, nobody should buy a piece of automation equipment without talking to us and running it through the template, because we don't want anybody buying a piece of equipment that sits in the equipment graveyard. We want to avoid as much of that as possible.
The U.S. Department of Agriculture is investing $90 million in conservation efforts across the country. Karen Woodrich from USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service explains the intent of the agency's Conservation Innovation Grant Program and how it seeks to address a variety of priorities.
The Conservation Innovation Grants Program, it's a competitive program that NRCS offers to really support development of new tools, new approaches and practices, and up-and-coming technologies to really further our natural resource conservation on private lands. So we're looking for creative problem solving and innovation. So the CIG partners really look at addressing our water quality, water quantity, air quality, soil health, and wildlife habitat challenges, at the same time trying to improve ag operations.
Total payroll costs for California farmers have increased significantly over the past 2 decades. Assistant Professor of Cooperative Extension in the Department of Ag and Resource Economics at UC Berkeley, Allie Hill described how California ag labor compares to some other specialty crop states.
California minimum wages are rising faster than any other state, save for Washington. So we do actually see quite similar trends in the hourly wage rate in California and Washington. And then we have the increased reliance on H-2A workers. So Florida is our largest H-2A employing state, but they also have a much lower minimum wage than California. So the interplay between that minimum wage and H-2A and how that goes to impact the H-2A minimum wage, the AWR, is going to look quite a bit different in those 2 states. And then Washington state doesn't have as many H-2A workers as we do. So all of these things kind of compound each other.
The Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program is offering competitive grants to fund research and education projects that advance sustainable ag practices. The Western SARE Farmer Rancher Research and Education Grant Program supports on-farm sustainability solutions by funding innovative producer-driven research and outreach. This grant program involves agricultural producers and technical advisors implementing projects 1 to 3 years in scope to address identified needs in sustainable agriculture. Projects involving up to 2 producers can apply for up to $25,000. Projects with 3 or more producers working together may apply for up to $29,900. Proposals for the program will be accepted through October 23rd. More information about the grant opportunities is available at western.sare.org. I'm Brian German for AgNet West Radio Network.
Lower profits for global ag traders. That's coming up on this Lend of Hours. Global bumper harvests, a downturn in crop markets, and slower demand for farm equipment are shrinking profits and lowering the future outlooks for some of the world's biggest companies. Farm Policy News says St. Louis-based Bunge posted earnings of $1.73 a share in the second quarter, the lowest since the start of COVID-19 in 2020. The results also missed analyst expectations by as much as 10%. Also, global grain merchants ADM Company shares dropped 2% after the company missed Wall Street expectations for second quarter profits. The company's Ag Services and Oilseeds branch suffered a 56% year-on-year plunge in the quarterly operating profits due to multiple challenges. On the equipment side, farm and construction maker C&H Industrial lowered its full-year profit forecast for the second time, as slower tractor and combine demand mute recovery hopes. You're listening to the AgNet News Hour. Planning on taking your dog with you on vacation? Gary Crawford has some tips from an expert on this edition of Agriculture USA.
For many of us, it's right about this time of year when we finally decide, I need a vacation. And maybe you're thinking about possibly bringing your dog with you on vacation for the first time ever this year. Lots of things to consider on that score, especially if it's the dog's first long-distance car trip. So coming up, it's Dogs on Vacation. On this edition of Agriculture USA, I'm Gary Crawford. Well, you've worked hard all year long, all summer long, but now the summer's almost over. School will be starting before we know it, so at last it's time to say, let's go on vacation. This year, maybe for the first time ever, we might be thinking about bringing the dog with us on vacation.
Well, you're talking to me about my favorite thing ever, Gary, which is like dogs and bringing them along.
And that's Dawn Fitzhugh. She's the veterinarian with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Fitzhugh's first piece of advice, start preparing the dog and yourself as soon as possible. 2 weeks ahead of the trip would be ideal. Start the process by taking the dog to the vet.
just that trip alone, like how is that animal in that car, can give the person a really good sense of like, okay, do they like the car now? Do they hate the car now? And it's really good to talk to the vet about where you might be taking them to.
You can also talk to the vet about having your dog's vaccinations brought up to date, getting a copy of the dog's shot record to take with you on the trip. Also, talk to the vet about having the dog microchipped. However, on that score, make sure the dog also has a collar and a phone number on it.
If your dog happens to be loose and running and someone is able to catch them, it takes a while to be able to get to a microchip reader. But if you have a collar immediately available with your phone number, then they can get back in touch with you quickly.
Back to whether the dog can handle riding in the car, that's an important consideration. Many dogs get extremely anxious about riding in the car. Many have what looks like car sickness.
The good thing is nowadays there are some really nice medications that vets can prescribe to help with that kind of anxiety and help them get better settled into travel.
Some dogs don't like travel crates and carriers either, but Fitzhugh says a few days before the vacation's due to begin, leave the carrier out somewhere in the house.
Give them the opportunity to smell around that carrier, get comfortable being in it, possibly even feeding them in there and shutting the door while they're in there eating so that they're not seeing that carrier for the first time when you're about ready to take them in it is definitely a much better experience for you and for them.
That's for sure. So yes, with some dogs, it's sometimes a major project to even determine whether we should bring our beloved pets with us.
Deciding whether or not it is right for the pet for them to come along with you is just as important as like, do you want them to be with you?
That's right, because some dogs just do not tolerate travel very well or new surroundings. But once you and the vet agree that it would be okay to bring your dog with you, you can then be gathering things together to take with you on that trip, bearing in mind,
animals live through their noses. It's something that I think we often forget about.
So Dawn says, keep in mind,
for dogs in particular, it can be especially comforting to have like something that smells like home. So you want to like bring along a toy or two, definitely enough food, a water bowl so you can provide water to them, and making sure you have their vaccine records and enough medication.
Yours and the dog's.
And to keep in mind, if you plan to eat in the car, they're going to be right there asking for that food too. So you might want to plan, some quick snacks right outside of the car because you don't want to leave your pet in the car without the air conditioning on unaccompanied because it can get crazy hot in there.
Also, if your dog tends to get sick at its stomach from being in the car, a moving car, or in a new place.
And if it's a matter of just nausea and like vomiting, perhaps withholding their food before they travel is totally okay. You always want to make sure they have access to water, but it's totally fine to not feed them the morning of the trip and make sure that they have an empty stomach, so that can really help with nausea.
I'm Gary Crawford reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Western wildfire activity picked up in the month of July, but the rapid increase in fire complexes were months in the making. Rod Bain has more.
Current wildfire activity in the western U.S. has been 2 years in the making, according to USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey.
Let's take it all the way back to the winter of 2022-23. That was one of the wettest western winter wet seasons that we have ever seen, all the way from the Mexican border to the Canadian border, everywhere in between. Incredibly wet and snowy. And in fact, it was just so wet that we never really dried out that much in the summer months, even though it was climatologically dry as we moved through the summer of 2023.
That resulted last summer and fall in the lowest annual wildfire acreage recorded in the 21st century. Another wet winter was recorded in the West this past winter as well.
However, things have had an opportunity to dry out. This year, we got into a significant heat wave starting in June and peaking in early July.
And significant brush growth out west due to the above average wet conditions of the past 2 winters.
Fine fuel growth that is now curing cured and dried out during the summer. And now we are seeing perfect conditions for any ignition, whether it's a human-caused spark or lightning. And we've seen plenty of instances of both in recent weeks. Those fires can really take off.
Also, weather conditions in July have been ideal for supporting wildfire activity in the western U.S.
Current weather conditions, which includes hot and dry weather, and that can be an added problem when you have low humidity levels and high winds. So for a lot of these California and northwestern wildfires, it's kind of the perfect storm.
The results regarding acreage burned by wildfire so far in the total U.S. as July 2024 was ending.
We are just right around 4 million acres burned in the United States. That's not particularly high historically. We've actually seen annual wildfire acreage totals topping 10 million acres 3 times.
Yet fire activity the past few weeks has been hot and dangerous, according to Rippey.
In late July, we are seeing almost 100 active large wildfires in the western United States. Those 96 active wildfires collectively have burned about 2 million acres. And there's no sign of that changing, with new fires being started all the time, unfortunately by human activity and also by lightning strikes.
As of July's end, more than 25,000 fire personnel were involved in combating the active and contained wildfire complexes. Now, for weather conditions in the first few days of August.
As we head through this week and beyond, it looks like the extreme heat is returning to the west. That could be accompanied at times by dry lightning strikes, gusty winds, and extremely low humidity levels that could promote new wildfire activity and expansion of existing fires. So we are nowhere near done with this. We're looking at least several more weeks in the Northwest and longer than that as you move southward into California before we can put this behind us.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
This is the AgNet News Hour. We will be back in just a moment with more agriculture news. You're listening to the AgNet News Hour with today's featured interview. Here's Cindy Zimmerman.
All right, Joyce, first of all, what I'd like you to do is introduce yourself for me, please.
My name is Joyce Hunter, and I'm the Executive Director for Collaboration and Education for Mission Critical.
And you're also one of the ambassadors here, right?
Yes, I am. And I am an ambassador for Women in Ag Tech.
Why did you want to be an ambassador for this group?
Because it's very important for women to have a voice in the agriculture space. And I thought that, being a deputy CIO and then an acting CIO at the Department of Agriculture, I saw that there was a gap in women being involved in the agriculture space. And so when the opportunity came up, I jumped through the door.
Well, you gave a presentation today really about women having a voice in government.
Yes.
And being able to advocate and present your case and know what bills are passed and that kind of thing. Why is that important to you?
Because if you want to have a voice in government, you've got to make yourself known. And the way to do that is to read all of the documents that come out. And yes, it's a pain in the butt. It's just really tedious to get through all of those documents. But if you want to have a say in how those regulations and laws are going to affect you, then you have got to make your voice known.
Well, yeah, and it's like policy has a direct impact on business. Absolutely. And especially when we're talking about new technology. And there could be, now we talked about in your panel, you also talked about the recent Chevron decision from the Supreme Court, which could impact a lot of the negative decisions that have come out of the EPA, for example. Why is it's a little bit complicated, but what would you do to encourage people who are in the ag tech space to find out more about it?
I would talk to their local legislators. I would actually talk to their staffers and find out what they know about Chevron. And I would do your own investigation yourself. Take a look at some of the legislation and, go to some of the ag tech magazines and see, or I have an even better idea. Go to ChatGPT. Ask ChatGPT, how does Chevron affect the agriculture industry or the agriculture business? Or how does it affect my industry? And put your industry down there. And it will come back with a list of things how it will affect your business.
Oh, that's great. Well, you also you talked about advocacy. I think that advocacy takes many different forms, where you're talking to just the public, or if you're talking to to government officials. Talk a little bit about advocacy and its importance to some of the things we talked about today, like gene editing.
Yes. Go to town halls. A lot of people discount town halls. They say, I'm not going to go. But those are very important because politics is always local. And so if you can affect the local politics, that can usually generate up to some of the national voices that are heard. If there are ag days on the Hill, whatever hill it is, whether it's your local hill or whether it's Capitol Hill, participate in those. Become a member in Farm Bureau or whatever agriculture group there is that is in your local area, and be a voice for your own organization in those instances.
When you were a part of the USDA under President Obama, you said one of the things you learned is there's not enough women involved. What else did you learn?
I learned that a lot of people think that agriculture is still Beverly Hillbillies and Green Acres, that there's no technology in it, so nobody pays attention to it. One other thing I learned is that with the SNAP and WIC programs, a lot of people think that, the poster child for some underserved person that's on TV. And they don't really understand that SNAP and WIC is so beneficial for those farmers, ranchers, and producers who have lost their farms because of tornadoes, hurricanes, or any other natural disaster. Until they could get back up on their feet, they have SNAP and WIC to sustain them, put food on the table, and clothes on their back until those resources become available again.
One of the things you also talked about here was a new initiative you're working on called the North American Bioeconomy Data Alliance, or NABDA. Tell us a little bit about that.
What that does is it's feedstock management. So what do you do with the feedstock that's going to be generated? Are you developing it for fuel? Are you developing it for feeding? Are you developing it for some other purpose, a trade? So it's looking at all of the feedstock that's available and how are we going to be able to compensate farmers for what they are growing. And they need to have a voice in whatever legislation is going to come out about how to regulate that feedstock management. And so we're forming a working group. Tomorrow, the 30th of July, is going to be the first time we're going to start looking at putting together a framework. We're going to put together a working group, which is going to meet probably every other week through December. And then we're going to have a readout that we're going to present a report at Vision in January.
Where are you looking for input from for this working group?
Everybody we can possibly have. We're looking for farmers. We're looking for producers. We're looking for technology companies. We're looking for people even like John Deere. We want all voices to be a part of this decision because sometimes you can hear your own self think and you generate your own answers. So it's important that we have all voices included, even those voices that are not directly involved. Because if we say something, they may ask a question that we may not have thought of in order to get some clarification or some justification. So we want all the voices to be included in these discussions.
And biofuel producers as well?
Yes, we want biofuel producers. We want everybody in these discussions.
Well, we'll look forward to hearing more about that. Well, that's all the specific questions I have, Joyce. Anything else you want to add?
That is it. Just join Women in Ag Tech. We're a fabulous, wonderful group. You'll have a lot of fun and you'll learn lots.
How did you feel about the turnout today?
Oh, wonderful. A standing room only. It was amazing.
And so many new people.
Yes, that's what was so exciting about it. It was new people, the familiar faces, and we're growing.
It's really taken off in just a year, so
yes.
That's great. Well, great talking to you here, Joyce, at the Women in Ag Tech meeting at Tech Hub Live. I'm Cindy Zimmerman.
You're listening to the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. As we wrap up our morning, here's Gary Crawford with a couple more reports.
The USDA is out with its ag prices report for June, and as usual, it's a mix of good and not so good news, roughly looking favorable for most livestock producers, problematic for most row crop growers. One general theme, though, was a decline in the prices producers had to pay to do business. That prices paid index dropping microscopically during June, taking it down below last year, but by only 0.1%. Looking at June crop prices, mostly down. For corn, the average June price $4.48 a bushel, down 3 cents during June, leaving corn $2 below June a year ago. Wheat, a 33-cent drop in June, leaving wheat $1.81 below a year ago at an average $5.86 a bushel. Meanwhile, if you want to see products doing better than a year ago, just flip the report over to the livestock section, where you will see higher prices than a year ago for most every product except broilers and turkey. It's true, as we age, our brain's ability to process and think is diminished over time.
But there are a lot of things we can do to delay that as long as possible.
Kansas State University professor Sherilyn Jackson says one of those ways to help the brain is to move the body. She says it
helps improve the blood flow to the brain. That's really a key thing. It helps reduce inflammation. It helps to improve your cognitive health, meaning you can think more clearly, problem solve.
Physical activity also reduces the production of stress hormones, increases release of those feel-good hormones, and so as a result,
it helps us sleep better. That again plays into cognitive health.
Jackson says you don't have to have a rigorous exercise regime to get the benefits, but just simply
getting movement throughout your day.
Jackson says just getting up out of the chair and walking around the room every half hour or so can work wonders for the brain. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
The latest round of USDA Conservation Innovation Grant Awards continue a 2-decade effort to invest in conservation practices and trials of such innovations. Here's Rod Bain.
Since its inception 2 decades ago, USDA's Conservation Innovation Grant Program has provided significant investment in new approaches and technologies in the natural resources conservation realm.
The Conservation Innovation Grants Program, it's a competitive program that NRCS offers to really support development of new tools, new approaches and practices, and up-and-coming technologies to really further our natural resource conservation on private lands.
Karen Woodrich of the Natural Resources Conservation Service says almost $542 million in investments have supported CIG projects nationwide since 2004. Projects developing innovative tools and approaches to conservation and addressing specific concerns such as changing climate.
The National CIG has 2 parts. One is our on-farm conservation innovation trials, and our other is our CIG, what we call Classic. Classic is used to develop new tools and technologies. Our on-farm trials are more about widespread adoption and evaluation of some of our innovative conservation approaches.
Recently, the latest round of CIG awards was announced.
We're investing $90 million in 53 conservation innovation grant projects, and more than $69.7 million of that is on-farm trials, and then the remaining $20 million is for those CIG Classic projects.
In terms of the focus within each category of conservation innovation grants for 2024,
our on-farm trials really focused on a couple of things: irrigation water management technologies, nutrient management, feed management, and enteric methane reduction. And our classic CIGs are more of our traditional forestry habitat, energy economics kind of activities.
The end goals of CIG-funded projects, according to Woodrich,
we're looking for creative problem solving and innovation. So the CIG partners really look at addressing our water quality, water quantity, air quality, soil health, and wildlife habitat challenges. Same time trying to improve ag operations.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
That's today's top agriculture news. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. Thank you for sharing your morning with us.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West online at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also find our broadcast team of Brian German and Sabrina Halvorson on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.